I am editing a book with a colleague of mine from the Aga Khan Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. These are conference papers on a conference we held about 2.5 years ago on Muslim cultures in the Indian Ocean. And when we came to write the introduction to that volume, I needed then to get into relatively new discipline, which is called the heritage studies. So while I was doing that, inevitably then thoughts came to my mind that how would one apply these statements, these observations, assumptions, hypotheses to our heritage? In other words, to the Ismaili heritage. How would one do that? So when I got this invitation, and of course, appropriately from the webinar series on heritage, so I thought, well, why don't I then share with you a few of my, as I put it there, reflections and perceptions, which means these are very much subjective to me. The first thing that I would like to talk about really is this question, what is heritage? Now, I want to borrow this. Edward Tyler, he was an anthropologist, end of 20th century, beginning of, or end of 18th century, 19th century, beginning of 20th century. Edward Tyler, he talked of culture as a complex whole. And I would like to apply that phrase to heritage. To me, heritage is a complex whole which includes intangible aspects, beliefs, values, knowledge, practices that has come down to us, and also tangible aspects, which are, of course, objects, buildings, mausoleums, tombs, artifacts, etc. But what we need to observe and to note that there is a link between the present and the past. So heritage is that link, but also between the present and the future. So the present, in fact, is the common link, is the common denominator, because the use of heritage is always in the present, and this is termed the presentness of heritage as such, because it is in the present that we deal with heritage. Next slide, please. Okay, can we have the next one, please? Okay, right, now begin with the definition. These are two authors who are talking about heritage as the present selects an inheritance from an imagined past for current use and decides what should be passed on to an imagined future. This is in their book, Dissonant Heritage. Right, now I say here that I really do not agree entirely with them. And what is the part that I don't agree with them when we apply it to the Ismaili heritage? Perhaps you might perhaps agree with them, but at least I feel that the use of the word imagined need to be qualified in both instances, in terms of imagined past and imagined future. Perhaps the future can be imagined, but I think we've come to a point in our understanding of the Ismaili heritage, perhaps with the exception of one or two periods, we sort of know, in a sense, what type of heritage sort of has come down to us. But then at the same time, the same authors see heritage as a contemporary product shaped from history. This I entirely agree with, because I think that's exactly what it is, but at the same time, here in the present. Then we have this author called, I think I would pronounce it as Croton, and he is saying that heritage, really, we need to look at it as the past processed through mythology, through ideology, through nationalism, through local pride, romantic ideas, or indeed just plain marketing into a commodity. So again, that can be unpacked. But what is common to all these is that heritage is value-added. And in the English language, we talk of heritage as either passed on or handed over. In my case, I would like to distinguish between the two. Of course, these two mean the same, but I would like to insert a little sort of distinction. And to me, the distinction is that heritage which is passed on, that is, not much is done to it in terms of molding it. And indeed, we know of communities who like to do that, who would like to see a heritage move from the earlier generation to their generation and to the next generation untouched. The texts which come in rituals, they want to see those texts, in fact, not just from the generation before, but in fact to go even back 1300 years. So, and then pass it on exactly as it is, the text of ritual, the text of recitations in practices, etc., to move that on to the next generation. I would term that as passing on. Whereas handed over, I would like to think, is that we take heritage, we look at it, we mold it, we change it, we reinforce it, and then we pass it over. And to me, that is what we do with Ismaili heritage. Next slide, please. Okay. Right. So to me, heritage is passed or is handed over when it is rendered meaningful and relevant here in the present. Hence my bolding there. And the handing over itself is a process. And that process then continues from generation to generation. And in our case, central to that process is the Imam and the institution of the Imamate on one hand, and I'll come to this later on. Well, let me just first talk about the Imam. And when we look in our doctrines, we have that, if you like, understanding of the position of the Imam as the Sahibu Zaman. Sahibu Zaman, meaning, of course, the Lord of Time, but time here in two or three senses. Time in the sense of present, Hadr wa Mawjood, he is here, he is now, but time also meaning changing times. That is, he is also someone who takes that into account while moving the community forward. In other words, the circumstances of the present. So in other words, the Imam is crucial in also the molding of heritage, in moving it from one generation to another. And I thought, and this is the only sort of visual in this presentation, let's look at these two photographs, which are so telling. So let's look at the first one for him, which is Bombay, 1885. Maulana Sultan Shah, 8 years old, surrounded by his leaders, such, and you can immediately see what this photograph is saying to us. You move 72 years on. Let's go to the second second photograph. Here we have 1957. Apart from the dress and the setting, and one is in subcontinent, one is in Europe. What is very interesting to me here is the presence of women in this photograph. So you see that the heritage which Maulana Sultan Shah was moving on at that time, right through his imamate, the 72 years, that aspect of heritage, we see it here. And even here, it changes then, because here you begin to see a certain dress, if you like. And if you were to move on, then you begin to see that type of. Now, why is this? Because the Imam, Maulana Sultan Shah, saw to it that for Ismailis to move, to progress, to take advantage of what is coming, not only women should be part of the community actively, but they should also be visible to the outside world, they should be participating. And of course, we see the results today everywhere we look in the community. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm giving you now another quote. This is from somebody called Lowenthal, the Heritage Crusade. Okay, now he is saying that heritage, far from being fatally predetermined, he uses the word fatally there, not in terms of death, but in terms of fate. So rather than we think of heritage as determined by fate, what he's saying, or God-given, he's saying it is in large measure our own marvelously malleable creation. It is our creation, and obviously he likes sort of to think that we engage with our heritage in a very marvelous sort of way. So we then hand it over to the next generation, and it is malleable. In other words, it allows us to change it the way we want to change it. So I've talked about the Imam and the Imamate, but that's one aspect of changing the Ismaili community, that is the vision of the Imam. But what is very important also is, of course, the role of the Jamati leadership in the shaping of that heritage. When an Imam becomes an Imam, 1957, the leaders are given, in the sense that those leaders who were with Maulana Sultan Ahmad Shah at that point, alayhi salam, they are the ones who are beginning now with Maulana Shah Karim al-Husseini. Now, the Imam's vision may be looking at 20, 30, 40 years down the line, but then the question arises, is the leadership which is given at that particular moment, is that leadership then capable of doing three things? First of all, capable of engaging in a meaningful dialogue with the Imam of the time. Dialogue is very important between the leadership and the Imam. Secondly, is it capable of understanding the vision of the Imam as it would unfold during his imamate? That is number two. And number three is it capable, having gone through number one and two, is it then capable of action, i.e. conveying the right message to the Jamaat, to the community, and doing the type of things that need to be done. Now, these are tall, perhaps it might be a tall order, but very, very gradually, it does unfold. And again, for that to happen, there is also another underlying aspect. And the underlying aspect is how good is the Jamaati leadership in engaging not only with the Jamaat, but also engaging with the world, with the society, with communities, other Muslim communities, the world around us, understanding the ethos which informs the cultures of other people, etc., etc., etc. At an institutional dinner, I remember, I forget the year, was it 1994, I'm not sure, when Wazir Shafiq Sachedina was delivering the welcome to Maulana Haj Imam at that time. I think I remember him using this sort of statement, or making this statement, that Kudawin, we were in school when you became the Imam. And to me, that was really symbolic of what I'm trying to say here. That here you have a leader who was a potential leader in future, who was at school when Haj Imam became Imam. And therefore, but then the Imam opens sort of opportunities for his leaders, his future leaders, all of us, in a sense, to begin to shape up to a point when we can actually move forward with his vision as such. So the role of Jamaati leadership is extremely, extremely crucial in shaping heritage. And I think perhaps when we write history, our history, we need to take that into account as such. And I think perhaps when we look at the Fatimid period, perhaps we see these things in there, if not quite strikingly and openly, but at least we see these in the descriptions which are now coming through. The other day I was listening to Dr. Shenul Jiwa in the seminar she gave only about 3-4 days ago. And it was wonderful to begin to see in this movement from Salamia to North Africa to Egypt, the parts played by leaders, not only the Imam, but also by the leader, Jawhar al-Siqili, etc., etc. So I think that in history also we can begin to sort of glean how the leadership has been. And of course, we have Qadi Noman's account of how leaders should behave with the Imam, in front of the Imam, etc. But in the current period, i.e. in the modern period now, we're talking of the heritage now, there are particular aspects that Maulana Hazim Imam has put in place for leaders to become cognizant with in terms of moving the vision onwards. Next slide, please, Fahim, please. Okay, now, there are some prerequisites. I've got 3 areas that I would like to share with you. But before I go to those areas, I just want some prerequisites. Pardon me, I'm going very fast because I really do want to finish it by, let us say, within 45 minutes. So there are these these prerequisites when we consider heritage. First of all, that throughout the making of heritage in our tariqah, or the shaping of heritage in our tariqah, the essence of our tariqah remains the same, and this is the essence as stated in the preamble to the Constitution. It is the expressions of how that essence is conveyed, how that essence is expressed, how that essence is taught, etc. It's that which changes. And we are not rigid. We are, as Maulana Sultan Shah said in his memoirs, Ismailism has survived because it has been fluid. But we should not misunderstand it. Being not rigid does not mean being unprincipled. Of course, we have the principles, and those principles are the essence as such. So that is prerequisite number 1. Secondly, that there has occurred during the Imamate Maulana Hazim Imam a confluence of traditions. There are 3, perhaps even more traditions, but I'm talking about the 3 main ones. The Farsi-speaking, the Arabic-speaking tradition, the Farsi-speaking tradition, the Gujarati, or rather the Indian subcontinent tradition. And to my mind, another tradition is emerging, which is still nascent, but it is present, which is emerging out of this confluence, and particularly in the West here and now. We are seeing a 4th tradition, or perhaps a 5th, which is emerging. And that is a tradition, I don't have a name for it. It will give, I'm sure, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, it will give itself a name, people will name it. But to me, it is in the West that this nascent tradition is beginning sort of to take shape. And English, the language English, is very much part of that emerging tradition as such. So that's the second thing we need to keep in mind. What is the third? The third is understanding and implying the meaning of what Maulana Hazim Imam has said about the tariqah, how he has defined it in those 3 aspects. Ours is an esoteric tradition. It is an intellectual tradition. It is a personal tradition. So now, understanding each one of those facets, keeping them as the background, keeping those two other areas which I've talked about as in our mind. Now let us look at the three areas that I would like us to sort of have a conversation about. So for him, next slide, please. First is tariqa. And I must say that these three areas are overlapping. The term tariqa was not so widely used in our community before 1986. The context in which it was used was very much doctrinal or theological, when one was talking about the spiritual steps, as it were, the Sharia, Haqiqat, Tariqat, Marifat, no, those four stages as such. But the Constitution of 1986, when it took the place of the word association, the Ismaili Association, now it became the Tariqa Religious and Education Board. It immediately brought about a change. And this change is not simply of terminology, but it's also a change of perception. Because at that point, what was intended perhaps, that we ourselves, we are defining ourselves in a way that you see other tariqas in Islam defining themselves, i.e. with, you look at writings on West Africa, you look at the Sufi tariqas or turuq, and you begin to see that the structure is the same. You have the murshid, you have the murid, murshid-murid relationship, etc. So in a sense, from 1986, who we are is being defined in a way that makes it, for others, easier to understand us, and perhaps for us ourselves also to understand ourselves. And to me, I find 1986 quite interesting, really, because 1986, if we walk through the previous 9 or 11 years, I had my notes here, okay, here we are. We find that 1986 is almost a culmination of what started way back. If we take 11 years, then we're going to 1975, the Paris Conference. Okay, so we're going through these, you see the Paris Conference of 1975, the beginning of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, 1977. We invite applications come in from the Global Jamaat for a program of the very first students who come to the Institute of Ismaili Studies in 1980 from different parts of the world, 9 countries in the world, Syria, Iran, India, Pakistan, California, etc., Canada, East Africa. For the first time, there was one before in Karachi, perhaps in a smaller sort of aspect. But here, you had it in London, and this is very significant because then that started the program of teachers who are being taught in a particular way, what developed in what was then called the IIS perspectives, which means you're looking at religious formation, religious education in sort of a very, very broad way. So there was that strand, okay. That was 1980, 90. But then the following years in 90, you also had at the Institute of Ismaili Studies the beginnings of what was then called the education unit, which was thinking in terms of the curriculum, which then became the curriculum department, which is now fully fledged, that aspect as well of actually going through the constitution, or the curriculum. At the same time, 1981, we began at this Ismaili Studies, the preschool series. And for that preschool series, it had its own curriculum, which received guidance. And it received guidance not simply in terms of the content of those books, but also in terms of the framework in which not only it, but future educational materials could be placed. That was very significant. So that was one. 1983, AKU starts. In Karachi, you have the charter ceremony, etc., 1983. So I could first go more. Well, let's take another example. 1979, the Padramni of Maulana Hazim Imam to Britain. And I think of it as a watershed Padramni. Why a watershed Padramni? Because that was the time when Maulana Hazim Imam made his vision very clear that you are settling in this country, and because you're settling in this country, there are other aspects that need to be put into place. And therefore, if I go back to my earlier point, there are particular types of leaders who need to take this forward. And in September 1979, he laid the foundation stone of the Ismaili Center, itself a material, tangible symbol of Ismaili settlement in Britain, and more than that, it's a symbol representing our identity within this pluralistic society. So you have the Ismaili Center, and then of course there was one in Burnaby. So you see this type of developments, and then of course you have the beginnings of strong institutions now, which are put in place. Perhaps I may have forgotten one or two even very significant events. But my point is, by 1986, when even the Constitution itself had its own commission, prior to that, which were looking into how to get the Constitution changing, when at the directive of Maulana Hazim Imam that they should do that. So the Constitution of 1986, in a sense, becomes a constitution which would take us forward, as it were. And within that constitution, given all these things which have happened in the previous 11 or 9 years, we now see the impact or the importance of the change of the word Ismaili Association to Tariqa. But what is also important from 1986 onwards is that the community, the Jamaat, must not only have leadership, which then moves it forward, but also that the institutions must be strong. And Maulana Hazim Imam's firm answer, that period, you see, he's talking about institutions. For to me, the existential foundations of our institutions are rooted in the Ismaili Imamate. You look at the organogram of the AKDN, we forget this, but AKU is not out on a limb, or Arkan Trust for Culture. They are all integrated within what at the top, which said Ismaili Imamate. And when Hazim Imam signs a treaty with a particular country, it is the Ismaili Imamate which is signing that treaty. And the Ismaili Imamate then is made stronger by institutions. And institutions, of course, are far greater than individuals. And this is also a lesson for the leadership, which is that when we get into an institution to serve, it's not these 3 years we serve so that we can put it in the end of term report. No, it's service in terms of these longer term goals that we are looking at. looking at 3 years and saying, oh, this is what we did during a 3-year period. Yeah, that's fine, that's human. But there's a greater goal than that. And that greater goal is really to repeat all those processes from 1975 to 1986. It's repeated again to now, to 2012 as such. And of course, within that, then you need scholars, you need writers, you need people who understand the vision, etc. And what emerges from this then is a very broader understanding of our identity through the tariqa. So that's the time. Okay, right. Next slide please. Next, we come to the ethics of our faith. Right. The ethics of our faith, these are our guiding principles in engaging with ourselves and engaging with the world around us. So the ethics of our faith, of course, are universal values of Islam. And to me, the two words which Maulana Hazim has used, which epitomize this, is social conscience. I think social conscience, not only for us as individuals, but as Jamaat as a whole, and how it is being shaped institutionally, that is, again, shaping our heritage. This is what we want to pass on to our next generation. And here, these two institutions are really at the forefront of this. Focus International and Ismaili Civic, because it is through these two institutions that we're expressing our social conscience to those beyond us, not only within us, but then those beyond us. And of course, Maulana Hazim has reminded us in terms of this word philanthropy, that philanthropy is not just something that one does, but it is an obligation on the Ismaili Imamat. It is innate to it as such. So let me move on to the final area. And then, as I said, these are all interlinked areas. The final one is, of course, quality of life. And again, in the Jubilee Farmers, Maulana Hazim talked about education, lifelong learning, poverty, alleviation of poverty, English language, pluralism, meritocracy, all these aspects which the Imam has been highlighting in different fora, different contexts, different countries, etc., but all coming together very, very slowly. And that, to me, is the shaping of our heritage as such. Can you go to the next slide, please? Right, now I want to almost end, because I want us to discuss. So I want to end with these two quotations. One is that heritage, and this is the quotation, is never inert. People engage with it, they rework it, they appropriate it, they contest it. It is part of the way identities are created. And not only just created, but disputed. And we see this in our history. Whether as individual, as group, or as nation. This is in this book, which I've given you there. The other one, this is not direct quote, but what he's saying is that heritage is not given, it is made. And so is unavoidably an ethical enterprise. In other words, heritage is ethical. Whatever we do with it, in the end, it becomes a question of our ethics, how we want to project ourselves, how we want others to see us. So in a sense, heritage is a very deceptive word, because we automatically associate it with the past. Of course, it is from the past, but it is in the present that we are engaging with it. And as that one of the quotes said, it is malleable, it is marvelously malleable, and we can do with it what we want to do with it. And as a community, what we want to do with it is in consonance with the vision of the Imam of the time.